Starfield isn't that bad. What a wild statement to make. Yeah, I know. You're probably wondering how I got here. To answer that, let's start at the beginning. Starfield's biggest problem is its exploration. Well, a lack of it, really. In a literal multiverse cluttered with infinite iterations of thousands of planets, you'd expect the in-game universe to reflect that in gameplay. You would expect each planet, or at least a good chunk of them, to be inherently unique from one another. You'd expect to be able to get lost amongst the stars, coming across different cultures and traditions, factions and biomes. You'd expect a colonized galaxy to feel, well, colonized. In a game made by the developers that pioneered exploration in video games, you'd expect the Starfield to truly exceed any of Bethesda's video game predecessors. That's at the very least what you'd expect. And that's exactly why Starfield quote-unquote failed in the eyes of many. But this video is titled Why Starfield Isn't That Bad. Until I inevitably change the title a million times over because I have a major overthinking problem, but regardless, you're probably wondering why I'm conforming to the general consensus that Starfield is bad in a video with a positive title. Well, that's the thing. I don't think Starfield is bad at all. I adore Starfield. I think it's truly one of the best games I have ever played, regardless of its flaws that even I can't contest. In this nuanced critique of Starfield from Bethesda Game Studios, we'll discuss narrative and gameplay, the good, the bad, what could have been done better, and why I believe, despite everything, there truly is something special in there, like a diamond hidden away, tucked so far in the blackest sea that it's understandably hard to find and easy to miss. But once you find it, the diamond shines brighter than any star. Here's why Starfield really isn't that bad. Todd Howard, the game director of Oblivion, Skyrim, Fallout 3 and 4, and now Starfield, stated in a 2021 interview from the Washington Post that Starfield is like Skyrim in space. That quote right there held Starfield and Bethesda to a standard it would never be able to fulfill. You see, Skyrim is iconic for its exploration. If you ask any gamer about Skyrim, they'll generally agree. In Skyrim, the tutorial sets the world and story up, then you're thrown into a massive space with the ability to go in any direction. And Starfield for sure throws you into a similar situation. You finish the tutorial and are set on your merry way across the expanse of space, to go anywhere and do anything. But there's a very specific differentiation in the execution between Skyrim and Starfield's exploration. In Skyrim, exploration was and will always be appealing, not because you can go anywhere and do anything, but the reason you do it. When I walk across Skyrim, whichever direction I walk in, I know I'll stumble across a unique quest, find an artifact that'll change the course of my playthrough, or even run into specific world spaces that stand out from the rest. Skyrim is full to the brim with content waiting to be found. Skyrim has rewarding exploration in any which direction you choose. Starfield promises the same rewarding exploration, but completely falls short of that promise. You can, like Skyrim, go anywhere and do anything. But for what? Land on a planet you see in the distance? Well, you can't travel there organically. You must select said planet and fast travel there from the map menu. Once you land on said planet, there's not a promise that you'll find anything unique there. No settlements, no NPCs, no interesting loot tied to quests, nothing. So yes, Starfield mirrors Skyrim in the sense that you can explore freely. That promise was true. But it's what's inside the world you explore that makes it worth doing in the first place, makes it meaningful. Now, there is a strange sense of solace in the vast emptiness of space. There's a beauty here that I think is intentional by Bethesda, and it's partly this feeling of desolation that draws me into the world of Starfield, but we'll get onto that in due time. Rather than yapping on about the stark difference in exploration between these games, allow me to guide you through an example in Skyrim and then Starfield. During my most recent playthrough of Skyrim, I spotted a strange-looking man standing outside of an unassuming house in the city of Markarth. I of course approached the man because my intrigue got the better of me, and we engaged in a fairly fruitful conversation. He explained that an evil entity resided inside the house and urged me to help him destroy the evil within. With the promise of rewards, I obliged. By exploring the house with the man who reveals himself to be a vigilant of Stendar, we come across a shrine to the Daedric lord Molag Bal. The evil god promised a reward unimaginable if I execute the nice man, and then retrieve a worshipper of another god and bring them to him. So I then go on a hunt to find this man across Skyrim. I bring him back to Molag Bal, in turn handing his soul over to the ancient evil gods, and before I know it, I've been rewarded with the Mace of Molag Bal, a unique looking weapon with its own unique boons. All that from random exploration. Now let's dive into Starfield. On my travels across New Atlantis, I came across a woman called Luisa Reyes. She asked me to help out with flipping some junction box switches across the city. As I went from box to box, Luisa, on a headset call to me, let me in onto more details of why she wanted my help. Without spoiling, a small conspiracy ends up coming to light. It's compelling stuff to start with, and it got me wondering where this conspiracy could go. Long story short, there's a ton of build-up across the quest that seems as if it's leading somewhere, but then it just ends. No payoff to what was built up. The only thing that remained was a feeling of time wasted. No real reward. No more insight into the world. I'd never saw the NPCs involved in the quest again. Simply put, it was an errand quest with no substance or payoff. Now, don't get me wrong, the House of Horrors quest in Skyrim was also an errand quest. I fetched a dude across the map and got some loot. But it was an errands quest with a level of depth that didn't make it feel like a chore. There was substance to what I was doing, and then a payoff when the mini-story was wrapped up and I received the Mace of Molag Bal. These two quests are designed very similarly, but the results are staggeringly different. I came away from one feeling empowered and satisfied, and I came away from the other feeling relieved it was over, but disappointed that something that could have been compelling didn't go anywhere. So if you aren't sensory deprived, you'll clearly be able to see the contrast between Skyrim and Starfield. One game rewards exploration with meaningful content, whilst the other gives you the same meaningless experience across the whole galaxy. Now, Starfield does have a decent amount of meaningful content. It's not all dull and predictable, and we'll get onto what it does well later, but for the size of the open world, Starfield does not sufficiently fill that world with, well, meaning. And the same goes for loot. Again, the Mace of Molag Bal is a prime example of unique loot that makes searching for it worthwhile. Starfield does not do this. Every item is generic and aesthetic, and it's only stats that make one item stand out from another. It's boring. Going back to Todd's promise, a promise that could of course never be fulfilled in Starfield, purely by the idea and vision of what Starfield is as a piece of art. Todd Howard should have never compared Starfield to Skyrim at all. You can't blame people for comparing these two games with completely different art directions when the creator himself did the exact same thing. So, the words and type of Todd Howard, along with a bias of what came before, all led to an impossible standard and expectation for Starfield to be something it could never be. As I stated earlier on, there is a true feeling of comfort in Starfield's open world, its destitute galaxy. I often find myself lingering in the vacuum of space, gazing out at the endless sea of stars, imagining all of the untouched wonders of the universe. Wandering across an arid moon or trudging through a jungle-like world, wherever I am in the Starfield, I feel like a part of a singular weave amongst the ever-evolving, ever-flowing tapestry that is the universe, and subsequently the multiverse at large. Starfield does a stellar job at making you feel minute, and simultaneously part of something bigger. I wouldn't associate my own experience with Starfield as a game to explore, but again, a game to linger, to fathom reality's united consciousness, and to realise you are indeed a part of the collective consciousness that is the universe. The only other experience that makes me feel this way is looking up at the real night sky and allowing my mind to wander. So to think that a video game can conjure these same emotions is an art form in of itself. But don't get it twisted, Starfield isn't all empty, as I have already said and feel it's important to reiterate. And most of the narrative themes and side content merge nicely with Starfield's expanse of space. As much as I think leaving 80% of the game's open world empty for players to use a settlement mode to fill out the world themselves is lazy design, and Bethesda has lent way too much on this game mechanic since Fallout 4, I must say, I find much enjoyment in building small outhouses or large bases on worlds. It feels like true space colonization. In the real world, I believe it likely that eventually some small groups of individuals will branch away from civilization in order to strike out on their own, and so there feels to me this sense of realism in the settlement and shipbuilding mechanics of Starfield. I love science and futurism, and so I think that's why I adore Starfield in the way I do. It scratches that itch that no other game really has for me. Now, although exploration as a whole in Starfield is lackluster, the handcrafted major cities of the galaxy are far from it, and boast real, raw, classic Bethesda exploration. Take the city of Neon, a city that does exactly what it says on the tin. Neon is covered in a sea of neon lights. This is a nice juxtaposition to what exists beyond the city walls. A pale, foggy planet covered in sea. The only things that make the rest of this world in any way, shape or form interesting is the never-ending raging storm this planet is resident to, along with its other residents. Big-ass sea creatures that can be harvested to create an intoxicant called Aurora. On your travels across Neon, you'll encounter all manners of debauchery, crackheads on every corner just trying to make ends meet, and the rich capitalists profiting off the very problem they created with the drug economy in the first place. Trust me when I say, there's a lot of interesting content to be found in Neon. New Atlantis is the capital of the settled systems, a metropolis of wealth and power. This city isn't as interesting as Neon, but there is indeed more than meets the eye here. New Atlantis is built in layers. At the top you have the rich district, whilst at the very bottom is a place called The Well, a hive of poverty, scum and villainy. I think there's something to be said here with the poor and wealthy divide. Taking a look at Starfield's main narrative theme being humanity, which we'll cover in depth in a bit, to be human is to be rich, to be poor, to be evil, to be good. Wherever humanity exists, problems exist. But hidden under the caveats that come with said problems is hope. I don't know. I feel like Neon and New Atlantis reflects this in a way, or maybe I'm looking into this way too much. Aquila City is the Wild West of the galaxy, home to the Freestar Collective. These guys are often at odds with the settled systems, and have been in one way or another for centuries. This is the supposed land of the free. Just how free it really is, well, you'll have to explore to find out. There's also a good deal of handcrafted towns and settlements to find and explore. Aside from the main cities I just mentioned, these too have their own unique stories and characters. Places to look out for are the Mars and Titan colonies, to name a couple. In my opinion, Neon is by far the most intricate city in Starfield, but as a whole, Starfield cities are well crafted in that classic Bethesda style. Sure, the cities compared to the rest of the empty worlds around them feel very disjointed, but looking at the cities solely as they are, in a vacuum, I'd say they rival most other BGS games purely by design. That's the issue though, isn't it? In a vacuum they're good, but what makes a perfect Bethesda experience is everything laid together in great design across the board. It's hard for one great aspect of Starfield to shine when other dull aspects overlay it. Starfield's main narrative theme is about the preciousness of humanity. How far can you go in space, in life, and remain true to who you are? What does it mean to be human, in a universe so fragile, so idealistic, yet fractured? This is, by far, Bethesda Game Studios' best narrative writing ever. The story knows that nuance is best served when telling a sci-fi story based on realism. I think the fragility and importance of humanity is such a powerful theme to revolve a sci-fi story around. After all, it is humanity that will likely take us into a space age such as Starfield's. Starfield is about wonder. Wonder is sparked from the mind of humans. Humanity inspires wonder, and so on. Now, the idea of a multiverse almost mirrors this. An infinite amount of views to exist, an infinite amount of Milky Way galaxies, an infinite amount of possibility, and an infinite amount of wonder. As you finish the main questline for Starfield, you'll have the opportunity to enter into a new universe, if you choose to do so. I won't spoil why or how this happens, as I feel it's a story best encountered by naturally playing, but if you do enter into a new universe, you'll be able to play a new game plus, but with slight variations in this new universe. You will end up playing differently to your first playthrough, if only slightly, and this feeling of wonder will resurface again, and again, and again. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. let's talk about the main storyline, factions, and side quests. You, as the game's protagonist, are thrust from the mundane into the wonderful. In a mining expedition gone wrong, you encounter an artifact from a mysterious and presumably long-dead civilization. This artifact reacts to you in such a strange way that a faction by the name of Constellation makes contact. They recruit you into their ranks. In the year 2275, Constellation were born as a result of the wider expanse of humanity across the stars, to explore the galaxy. 15 years later, in 2300, the year Starfield takes place, they are but a shadow of their former glory. The protagonist, as part of this faction, sets out across the galaxy in the hopes to discover more of these artifacts and hopefully piece together what it all means. Remnants of this presumably ancient civilization provide the protagonist with different abilities, and we'll cover these later. Overall, I think the main story is the best questline in the game. Don't get me wrong, there are other faction questlines that rival this, but when it comes to writing and a true reflection of what a sci-fi story can be, I think the main story hits the nail on the head. And don't get me started on the companions in Starfield. Wait, no, actually, this is my video, so I will talk about them. There are a good few companions that you can find in the world that don't come with the main story, but to be honest, these are quite forgettable with no real character depth. The main Constellation companions, however, they're not on the insane level of depth as Baldur's Gate 3's companions, but they're charming. They feel like real people, and you will grow a connection with them. These are the guys that are very present in the main questline and are the most fleshed out. Then, as you journey with them, you'll get the chance to speak with them, learn more about their backstories, which will eventually lead to their own questlines, and even romance, if any of the companions take your fancy. It's this blend of character growth across the entire game with these companions that blend into the main plot, and especially the game's themes that just make for a fairly competent and believable narrative. Now look, the main story is by no means perfect, some parts feel contrived, be that through character interactions like when one NPC just gave me some really important information when I was a literal stranger to them, or important items just happening to be in the perfect spot. Parts like this feel silly, and I myself could think of much better ways of progressing quests. But the bad doesn't necessarily take away from what I see as the good. And overall missteps like these were few and far between enough to not tarnish what, again, I see as a fairly competent story. In regard to other faction questlines in Starfield, there are actually quite a few. Some are on par with the main story in quality, and some are, well, bad. You've got the UC Vanguard questline that incorporates horror vibes which can be comparable to the Alien series. Then there's the Crimson Fleet that brings a unique undercover detective spin to it. This is genuinely compelling stuff. But then you look at the Ryujin Industries questline, which comprises pretty much the same level design formula in every quest. You infiltrate a building, sneak through vents, hack a computer, and leave. There is undeniably a feeling of contrast in quality between different quests. It can at times feel quite hit or miss, which is obviously bad game design. This isn't anything new in BGS games, of course. The stark contrast in quality between the Dark Brotherhood and College of Winterhold questlines, for example, are night and day. But yeah, more consistency across the board with questing in future BGS games is an absolute must. This disjointedness of quality bleeds over onto individual side quests as well. One of the most memorable quests in my first playthrough of Starfield, for example, is the quest First Contact. In space, you'll encounter an odd-looking ship orbiting the planet's Perimeter 2. Now, this planet is home to a luxurious hotel resort called Paradiso. You know, it's like the Ritz, if the Ritz governed a whole-ass planet. The guys down on the surface ask you to check the ship out and basically tell them to fuck off. Whether it's aliens or not, they don't care. Get them out. So you fly back up and dock with the mysterious ship. Turns out it's a bunch of humans. They explain that they are the descendants of a long line of explorers who have lived on what is a generational ship. This ship left Earth hundreds of years ago in order to find a new planet in the habitable zone to live. During this mini-civilization's time on the ship, however, humanity leapfrogged them in technological advancement and has already settled Perimeter 2. So you've got this really insightful dialogue between these characters who find out their life mission is basically null and void, along with their amazement at the achievements of humanity during the voyage of their ship. You then have the choice to side with the settlers and find them a place to live, or side with the hotel and blast them as far away as possible. This quest delves into Starfield's theme of humanity once more and is genuinely a great quest. But then, let's remember back to the side quest I outlined earlier in this video, where I meet Luisa Reyes, and I flick junction box switches. Yeah, it's really hit or miss whether the next quest you'll find across your travels in Starfield will be full of nuance and substance, or devoid of any of it, delegating you to a glorified fetch quest. A major part of questing in an RPG is of course choices. And don't worry, I haven't forgotten about them. I've deliberately held off of talking about them in full as of yet, because I feel I need a dedicated segment here to explain how they don't really matter in Starfield. Starfield is first and foremost a looter-shooter game with a dialogue system. A soft RPG could be a term to describe this game, but it's not really an RPG, narratively speaking at least. The choices you make within the dialogue system decide what rewards you receive at the end of a quest, or certain variations of an outcome. But they don't really affect the flow of the quest, not in that much of a meaningful way, at least. There's a few big choices in the main story that decide the fate of certain characters, but again, from my experience, they don't change the way the story plays out, just who delivers what lines of dialogue, and what companion quests get locked off from you. I wouldn't call this the illusion of choice. What you decide does indeed have real impact on the game. It's just not at all that drastic indifference with whatever choice you make, meaning you won't ever feel the pressure to make big decisions in quests. You know that whatever you pick, the general outcome will be the same or at least very similar. Take the end of the Crimson Fleet storyline for example. The finale of a battle between the Pirate Fleet and Sistef, a military faction. If you side with Sistef, they'll win the battle and you'll get unique dialogue rewards and a set of radiant quests to partake in after the fact. If you side with the Crimson Fleet, you'll get all those things, but with a Crimson Fleet coat of paint. Again, the game reacts to your decisions, but they're just variations of the same outcome. They're not inherently different enough to actually feel like your choice matters in the grand scheme of things, outside of the immediate end quest rewards. Now there is of course the option to persuade, intimidate or negotiate during dialogue, when conversations permit. This is really helpful when trying to get extra pay or aid in your current mission, and the mechanic is really fun. You have a certain amount of attempts to sway the conversation in your favour, with certain dialogue options being more or less likely to work based on your dedicated skill. This brings an extra layer of intensity to a conversation, and I absolutely have no gripes with this system at all when it comes down to how the mechanic is built. But sometimes answers can feel slightly contrived when successfully using this mechanic. But that's a writing issue. If you fail a persuasion, intimidation or negotiation attempts though, it won't adversely affect the outcome of the quest. You might just have to jump through 1 or 2 extra hurdles to get what you want. Once more, it's a layer of what feels like choice of sorts that leads to the same outcome in a roundabout way. Starfield to me is very much a linear game with the option to further enhance the story by choosing to go in more depth in dialogue and having the freedom to make small choices here and there, with a few exceptions where the main story has a couple of big choices that I won't spoil. Touching back on the undelivered promise of Starfield, this to me is a reminder of why so many were disappointed in the game. The expectation was much higher than reality. Then again, Skyrim and Fallout 4 didn't have much nuance in the way of player choice either, and despite the criticism I have just displayed in the game's choice and dialogue systems, I still feel it's a level above anything Bethesda has done since Morrowind. But that's not me saying it's on Morrowind's level, that's blasphemy, but it's still more in depth than anything we've had from BGS in a long time. Now I don't want this to be one of those videos where I overanalyze every single gameplay detail and mechanic because, well, I just don't want to do that, but I'll go over all aspects of gameplay in one general gameplay segment and talk about them until I'm satisfied they've been fairly covered. When you start a new playthrough, you'll be introduced to character creation. Here you'll pick the appearance of your avatar as well as your backgrounds and traits. The backgrounds tab of character creation drafts up an ambiguous past of your choosing for your character, and also aids in what starting skills and playstyle you'd like. Now I know I subtitled this gameplay segment of the video a competent shooter, and it is, but that shouldn't take away from the fact that, despite Starfield feeling like more of a soft RPG, there are still great features like choosing backgrounds and traits that scratch that RPG game system itch that Skyrim and Fallout 4 very much did not do. The mechanics of gun combat in Starfield are sound. You aim, you shoot, with different damage effects based on different weapon types. It feels satisfying to blast an enemy in the face with your trusty laser gun. The main issue with gun combat is tied to leveling and loot. At a certain point in a playthrough, usually quite early on, you'll come across a weapon that does crazy high damage in comparison to the HP of pretty much every enemy in the world, regardless of their level. At this point, you become insanely OP and all sense of challenge in combat is completely wiped away. This also removes a sense of reward for questing or looting, as you'll likely never find a weapon better in stats, and so there's no point in switching weapons. Ever. Something that doesn't help this at all is, again, Starfield's exclusion of unique weapons and armor. It's not like I can switch to different weapons that have unique stats to reflect the specific quest tied to said weapon. Once again, there's no Starfield equivalent of Skyrim's Mace of Molag Bal, Wabbajack, or Chillrend, and it's a shame. The only time I ever switch weapons past the 10-hour mark in Starfield is if I decide to go stealthy and want to take down enemies from behind or afar. Now I can use the weapon mod station to add a silencer, or I can equip a melee weapon. Starfield has swords, knives, axes, as well as a few more pointy things. Melee weapons work the same way as they do in any BGS game. Your character swipes their hands left and right like a butter knife and damage gets dealt. The way the creation engine works as a whole is quite intrinsic to the awkward feel of Melee in Bethesda games, and so Starfield is no different. However, animations are smoother in general to Skyrim and Fallout 4, and in fairness, that sentiment rings true across the entire game's animations. They're janky because it's a creation engine game, but they're still nicer looking than BGS games of the past. Workbenches are present for the creation of medpacks, weapon and spacesuit upgrades, foods and research. They're more in depth than the workstations of Skyrim, but they work in much the same way. These stations are great for enhancing gameplay, but from my experience, they're not at all required. Again, you'll easily come across OP gear that will carry you across the game. Plus, resources are readily available across the entire galaxy, be that from a vendor or the pockets of a cadaver. Now let's quickly talk about stats. Spacesuits and armor have damage stats and environmental stats. Damage is based on the type of weapon used against you, whilst environment is damage you might take in the world. These stats are easy to understand and are fairly sound. If you wear a spacesuit with less radiation protection and then land on a highly irradiated planet, chances are you'll receive afflictions such as radiation damage. If you wear a spacesuit with less cold resistance on an icy planet or moon, you'll probably get frostbite. Any and all afflictions negatively impact your character's performance and health, and can be a pain in the ass until cured, either by taking the corresponding consumables or visiting a med clinic. To come across gear with different stats, you may find yourself searching through chests or other containers, and in doing so, you'll probably run into the digi-picking minigame. This is Starfield's version of lockpicking. In Skyrim, you had a lock that you'd physically pick, and in Starfield, you're basically hacking into a digital security system that is commonplace across the galaxy for securing any item, be that a wardrobe or a computer. Now, I've heard some say that the digi-picking minigame is terrible and boring, and I mean, I'd agree that it's not as intuitive as Skyrim's lockpicking, or even the terminal hacking of Fallout. But, I dunno, I like digi-picking. Once you get the hang of how it works, it feels like an accomplishment to successfully hack into a high-level chest or computer. But I do think that there is far too much forced digi-picking that you can't bypass in most of Starfield's quests, and it can end up feeling quite tedious at times. Okay, let's talk about powers. So you can unlock different abilities throughout Starfield by coming across ancient, supposedly alien temples. Each temple requires you to float around following a glowing orb of light before it disappears. Once you've followed about what feels like 69 million orbs, you'll enter the center of the room and unlock a unique ability tied to the specific temple you're in. No, not you're in. You are in. These temples are tied to the story, but once you've visited one as part of the main quest, the rest are completely optional. It's kinda like how you'd get your first shout in Skyrim's main story, and then the rest are up to you to find. The first temple I discovered made my jaw drop. Again, it triggered that feeling of wonder. Stumbling across an ancient, otherworldly temple built by God knows who, as ominous music snuck up on me, alongside genuinely decent dialogue from my companion, gave me honest chills. This is the type of feeling I've been looking for, I thought to myself. This is amazing. I said. Moments like this are what can make Starfield so great. But it was such a unique and great feeling in that moment because I was discovering this temple for the first time alongside the story. After that, when you've seen one, you've seen them all. You know exactly what to expect, and that feeling, that sense of discovery, quickly fades. Every temple looks aesthetically the same, apart from a few exterior differences based on the planet or moon's biome, and the interiors are copy-paste, exactly the same, as well as the temple puzzles. And after a while, this gameplay loop gets incredibly monotonous. What starts as excitement in uncovering relics and power from the ones who came before, and the search for knowledge, ends up becoming a really boring grind that feels almost mandatory, as the powers each temple bestows are really helpful for gameplay. Well, until you find the OP weapon that I mentioned earlier, then powers are more of a gimmick. Fun nonetheless. I think if each temple was unique, with puzzles that parallel the power you'll unlock at said temple, it'd negate the feeling of stagnation after the first few temples, and tie in perfectly with the game's narrative theme. Have each temple provide some lore into the world or whoever built these places throughout its puzzles. This way there would be a genuinely good reason to keep hunting these places down. Going back to the first temple, it's moments like this that show just how strong Starfield can be. The quality just doesn't hold up in a playthrough. Or actually, it's not that it doesn't hold up, it just doesn't evolve in a meaningful way that will keep the player engaged. Anyway, I've blabbed on enough about how you can unlock powers. What do these powers actually do? There are 24 different powers to unlock, mostly involving gravity. I'll show some of them on screen as I don't really know what to say much about them other than the fact that they can make for some fun gameplay scenarios and are generally helpful during a fight. I mean, they add an extra layer of variety to combat as a whole. I do wish not all powers were combat focused though, as I can imagine abilities like levitation or some kind of NPC charm would be quite fruitful and provide more satisfaction that would lead into the rest of the game. Now stealth. A lot of quests in Starfield are actually stealth focused, in most cases requiring you to sneak through vents to reach terminals or to take out individuals. Or maybe I just feel like the game has more of a stealth focus because that was my preferred playstyle. I suppose I could have gone in guns blazing, but again, it all felt too OP for me too early on, and stealth makes things feel a little more challenging. It's classic Bethesda sneaking. Press B to crouch, and then your character does an awkward shuffle along the ground whilst NPCs go, "Huh? What was that?" It's baseline, but it works, and level design allows you to get creative, again with the vent systems present in most buildings. One of the most intrinsic gameplay elements of Starfield is of course starships. I'm going to explain the ins and outs of the starship gameplay such as traversal, combat, and ship building. Then I'll take some time to explain how this gameplay formula is perfect in a vacuum, aside from the rest of Starfield. You'll begin Starfield with your trusty starter ship, the Frontier. I won't spoil how you unlock this ship, but it's right at the start of the game. This ship is cozy. It's your humble abode. As you play Starfield, you'll gain access to bigger, better, and faster starships, either by upgrading what you have, buying new ships from vendors across the galaxy, or by going full space pirate and snagging any you come across in space, to name a few ways you can unlock ships. The more advanced the ship, the higher your piloting level needs to be to fly it. And quick side note, yes, main character skills are in Starfield as you'd expect any RPG, especially a Bethesda one, to have. Starship traversal and combat is where Starfield shines, and I feel like not enough people are talking about it. When it comes to flying a spaceship in a video game, Starfield takes the cake for best gameplay. Space combat is very fluid. It takes some time to fully grip and master, but after a while, something just clicks. More advanced starships have access to better weaponry, which allow better targeting, more damage, and your player piloting skill tree works in tandem with ship upgrading to allow for a genuine feeling of progression. Enemy ships are very reactive to your attacks. They'll try to evade you at any chance they can, which requires you to focus on maneuvering whilst engaging with your projectiles. Your ship's main functions that you can allocate power to on the fly is lasers, particle weapons, missiles, engine, shield, and grav drive. You'll have a set amount of power to allocate across the board. For example, when peacefully exploring, you'll want to set your engine to full power, and have your weapons on low power. And in a fight, you'll want most power to your weapons, grav drive low, unless you want to grav jump away from a fight, and engine around medium power so you can still dodge incoming attacks. It's reactive based on circumstance. And as a role player, I could really get into the vibe of being a captain. During intense battles, I'd find myself shouting like, "All weapons to full power!" Or, "Revert all power to the grav drive! We need to fucking dip!" Starship gameplay in Starfield is exactly at the level of quality I'd expect a space opera RPG to be, and I love it. The shipbuilding mechanic itself is quite janky. You've got to drag ship parts onto wherever you'd like that part to be, but the system itself feels really floaty. There is a sort of clipping when hovering parts over your ship, but it's really oversensitive, making the slightest thumbstick movement leaving you wondering whether you've even clipped a part onto your ship in the right place. It's a very convoluted mechanic with little to no tutorial or explanation to how it works, leaving you to quite literally fuck around and find out. And that would be fine if the system was fun and intuitive, but it's not. So you end up just tearing your hair out. The shipbuilding mechanic feels unfinished in all honesty. The concept is great, and when it works you feel a real sense of accomplishment and self-pride. But sadly, that doesn't often happen. I got most of my ships by finding them in the world, and by all manners of unscrupulous means, which I'd be remiss not to mention. Settlement building works by going out and collecting raw materials, then refining those materials at workbenches to create items needed to build. You can do everything from putting walls, stairs, and overall structure together in a way that you want, to the interior design specified to your own vibe. Think settlement building of Fallout 4, but with a little more finesse. You can also decorate already existing player homes in major cities like Neon, New Atlantis, and Aquila City as well. What I like about settlement building in Starfield over Fallout 4 is that although I suppose exploration pushes you to build, the main story and quests themselves don't. That's all I have to say about settlement building in Starfield really. Someone else might be able to critique it better, but crafting and survival games are by no means my strong suit, so any more talk of this would probably end up as rambling. Lastly, I feel I'd be remiss not to briefly mention the environment scanning system in Starfield. As you walk across worlds and moons, you'll encounter flora and fauna that you can scan, along with resources for building as I mentioned earlier. Scanning these things basically gives you insight into what things each world contains. It's more about documenting what you see more than anything, but can come in handy when going back to places you've been in search of building materials. This scanner system also gives you a path to follow that will lead to your active quest objective. Overall, it's pretty handy, but nothing special. So in a vacuum, questing aside, on-foot exploration aside, just being in this world, flying around different solar systems, walking around your ship and talking to the crew, building settlements and gazing upon the universe and your place in it as the player, it's a vibe unmatched. Some games come close. No Man's Sky is probably most similar in this aspect of Starfield, but I dunno man. Starfield has its own charm that just suits my game taste and sensibilities perfectly. I really wholeheartedly love Starfield when it plays to its strengths. It doesn't always do this, but when it does, it's leagues better than anyone gives it credit for. Now, I don't want to touch upon the subject of Starfield's DLC. The exploration and content problem goes way worse than base Starfield, and so I feel that topic would deserve its own video. Will I make that video? I'm not sure. Maybe. I think a lot. I wonder about what's out there, above us all in the cosmos of space. From the simplest of moons to the grandest of nebulas. I wonder what a day in the life of a methane rain droplet on Titan is like. And I find curiosity in the constellations we see at night, here on Earth. Sometimes I even ponder who else might be out there, in the far reaches of the void. Are they a kind, good-natured people? Or perhaps they're an aggressive species, dominant in their own place in our universe? And sometimes I wonder if there's anyone else out there at all, or are we simply, really, truly alone? The idea of existence, reality, life in its simplest form being the universe we experience, sincerely boggles the mind. I find pure existential bliss in wonder, true peace of mind. So when a video game comes along which shares the same inherent wonder that I do, and explores it in ways that procure the very feeling I deem to be me at my happiest, of course I'm going to fall in love with it, despite any flaws it may have. There's a famous quote that I think you'll have heard before. Born too late to explore the seas, born too early to explore the stars. I used to live by that statement closer than I'd like to admit growing up, as I was quite the pessimist. Yet, as I grow, become wiser and more understanding, I relinquish it wholeheartedly. Where wonder exists, anything exists. Any experience you can conjure up in your mind can be real if you set your mind to it. In some instances objectively and some subjectively. But wonder exists nonetheless. Who's to say you won't one day explore the seas? And who's to say you won't one day explore the stars? I'm starting to get the feeling this is my outro, as I type my script out late at night, appreciating the world I live in and the ones I don't. You may despise Starfield because of its blatant exploration problems, its lack of player choice and questionable mechanics, and I understand. But I love Starfield because it triggers an emotional response that echoes through the very being that makes up me. Thank you for watching. If you liked, appreciated, or can resonate with anything I said here today, then I'd love for you to subscribe. This is the first video here at Players Pad, and I plan to keep things moving. I'd like to talk about any game that strikes something within me, be that positive or negative. Some videos will be deeply personal, such as this one, but I also have videos in the works that are more comedy and skit focused, still revolving around video games of course. Players Pad welcomes you. Join now.